What it is, what it was, what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video, Spirit War Boot Camp number 101. And this is called Memetic Warfare Division. How's everyone doing? So this is actually a good update and continuation of our previous video dealing with current events. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the extent of memetic warfare. And I want to trace this back to World War II. This is where memetic warfare went into high gear, and all modern psyops and all the, well, other types of what they call trauma-based mind control, all kinds of pharmaceutical interventions, all trace back to this pivotal period in history and highly relevant now, where we're seeing in this latest conflict, memetic warfare has kicked into high gear. You know, they got they got the cardboard Khomeini going. They got like 50 million BB with six fingers memes. Like, we don't even know what reality is anymore. I don't remember how many videos back I was alluding to this, the concept of reality weapons. And on the most basic level, I would say memetics is that, because we can, okay, so it's been shown and admitted that both the White House and the Israeli government have used AI videos purporting to be the leaders, okay? Think about that for a second. How do we know that any of these world events are real? And of course, I mean, the same thing goes back. This is always how it's been, back when there was 3 news channels and 2 news wires in the world. Like, there was not the level of media blitzing that we have now, right? So it was easy to fake things, really easy. Imagine back in the 1700s when they just had like newspapers, printing press with like some political cartoons, like how easily you could see the narrative all over the world and purport events that never ever happened, okay? Or at least not as the way we're told. And I think this is more relevant now than ever. In the previous video, I was going into some pretty harsh detail about people's worldviews and how people have very limiting worldviews and very limiting self-image and self-concept that allows them to be herded around like cattle, right? They have a strong conformity bias to this day, and this is only more and more reinforced by modern social media and things like that. Identity politics. They've got this down to a science, okay? They know how to herd humans. This is going back, the ancient Sumerians were already working on this stuff. You know, I mean, what do you think all their gold idols and all their statues and figurines of all these different gods and so on? That's a form of memetic warfare. So it goes all the way back, and the intention has always been the same, which is to herd humanity and to simplify the task of the middle management, what you call the bourgeoisie, basically the burghers, the burgesses, right? The borghesies, all these families that are just trying to pile up a big mountain of cash. That's why they call it Spielberg, right? They always got to have Zuckerberg. They always got to have a big mountain of something, a mountain of suckers, right? That's what Zuckerberg's got. He's got a mountain of suckers on Facebook. Spielberg, he's got a limitless mountain full of spiel, right? Of bullshit, story, fiction, fableman, as he calls himself in his own autobiographical pick, Mr. Fableman, right? And so nowhere is this more obvious than now exactly what we're seeing. So in the previous video, I said this was last Sunday. So what is it? Today's Tuesday. So I don't even know what day it is. Is it Monday? I think it is Monday. Anyway, it's only been 1 or 2 days since I made the previous video. It is actually Tuesday, the 24th. So it's only been 2 days. And in 2 days, like, a lot of what I said has come to pass in the sense that we're being told, and the media, and who knows, I mean, everything's still in flux right now. There's no definitive answers. But one of the things I predicted, I was like, yeah, Khomeini's fucked up or dead. And now this is verified. They're like, yeah, he's got a foot missing, you know, probably severe concussion. He's severely injured and in the hospital. So and that's why they had to have cardboard Khomeini. I don't know about BB. I haven't heard any definitive proof one way or another about BB. So who knows, I guess. And we could never know. You don't think they got body doubles? They've had body doubles all the way going back to the ancient world. And now with latex mask technology and shit like that, and actors, right? And AI video, like, we'll never know the truth. You kind of got to just, and that doesn't just apply to current events either. That applies to the past. Like truth is not something that we really have tons of access to in reality, okay? And this applies not only on these big world events and these political scale events, but this happens in our private life. And this is why I think Buddhism and the Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist training method is ideally suited to everything that we're facing right now in the AI reality view, world view warfare, right? Buddhism is uniquely suited to that because Buddhism denies the basic reality of our senses and what we look at and see. And from that Buddhist point of view, everything's uncertain, and all our perceptions at the most core level are colored by our biases. And even the highest level beings have some degree of bias. They can't perceive reality as it is, right? Like our eyes only perceive certain frequencies of light, and our ears can only hear certain frequencies of sound, and so on like that. Certain temperatures would kill us, right? We can't perceive like infinitely high or infinitely low temperatures because we would die, right? So you see what I'm saying? We're in a tight little frequency band, and that doesn't even get into personal bias, like how we don't want to believe anything bad about ourselves. We never want to admit or see our own shadow, so to speak, you know. And by the same token, like there's certain level of excellence and success that would scare us off too, actually. If we had too much of our wishes fulfilled, most people, there's a threshold of what they can be comfortable with, and or and not go crazy or something like that. So this is the reality, okay? And there's no getting away from that. But what we do have is we have in Buddhism this idea of gradual or sudden like enlightenment, right? So the idea that gradually or suddenly are usually a combination of both of those things. Like if, let's say you do something gradual for 50 years, you're meditating and stuff like that, and then one day you have a sudden breakthrough, but it's non-linear, right? So let's say you get a little bit better and better every day, but at some point you cross this like liminal threshold where suddenly there's like a quantum state, a state change, like you sublimate from a solid to a gas or something like that. You go through a phase change, and now you're in a whole different realm of shit. This is reality. This is how it is. But what we need is a framework, and this is a never-ending process, right? Because to the extent that we exist as we perceive ourselves as separate beings, like we're at one degree of remove minimum from reality itself, because we view ourselves as separate from that, right? So at that point, what we perceive is not really reality at the deep level. So what Buddhism is it's a way of kind of come to terms with that. And so there's all these interlocking concepts in Buddhism. Number one is impermanence and a fundamental interbeing, which means that nothing exists in a vacuum, nothing exists by itself, nothing is changeless, nothing is independent of anything. We're all interdependent. We need food, we need air, we need vacuum, a magnetic field, like we need all this stuff for our biological function and our senses to continue on, right? We need a certain degree of parameters in place for us to exist. And so, so in Buddhism, they have these two terms. Number one is shunyata. So that's the temporariness and dependence of all external reality. And then we have anatta, which is the lack of an atman, or an unchanging self nature, right? So everything's in flux. And one of the oldest philosophers known, arguably the oldest, is Heraclitus, right? At least in the Western hemisphere, Heraclitus, right? This guy, he's basically saying that the fundamental nature of all reality is change and paradox, right? You can't step into the same river twice. That's a classic saying. Everything's always in a state of flux, and change is the ultimate nature of reality in the continuum in which we exist, right? So now everything kind of is up for grabs. And so humans ostensibly don't like that. And so you have different responses to that. So in the East, their response to that is to develop this philosophy of impermanence and change and interdependence, But in the West, they do, after Aristotle at least, they do the opposite. They try to create a fake material reality, an eternalism. Buddhists would refer to this as eternalism. They try to create absolutism and eternalism, which is not fucking real, okay? Sorry to say. It's not. You can never demonstrate that. In fact, you can't even observe an absolute, because an absolute is non-relative. So therefore, you can't observe something without it being relative to yourself. You see what I mean? So it's paradoxical nonsense, basically. If such an absolutistic reality exists, we have no way to perceive it. Let's put it that way. And so it's useless to us to even speculate about, right? And even the Western religions a lot will acknowledge the incomprehensibility of God, right? And the human limitation. But again, they're positing this unchanging God, right? So that's an abstraction which can never be empirically demonstrated, right? How do you know something's eternal? Like, unless you're eternal, you can't perceive something eternal, right? You're just like, well, it was here when I got here. That's the best you could do, right? You can't experimentally verify eternity. That's silly. It's a silly concept. But most people don't think philosophically about anything. So, and this is where we get into the worldview warfare, Weltanschauungskrieg, as it's called in German. So this is what they learned. They learned by understanding the enemy's worldview, you can manipulate his perceptions and therefore his actions and choices and decision making, right? So this is why they came up with that idea. And so, for example, the classic example is Ian Fleming, the guy that wrote all the James Bond spy novels. Well, he himself was involved in psychological information warfare, whatever have you, psyops, basic psyops, let's put it that way. So what he did was he had certain intelligence about the Italians, the Italian fascists that the British were trying to work against to some extent. I think it was more of a turf war than anything real. I think, and they used each other. It's not like they were completely discrete from each other. They used each other for different aims, right? And they collaborated on certain things for different aims, you know, and then they just divvied up the spoils in a certain way at the end. And one team lost, right, quote unquote, and one team won. But the point is, so people like Aleister Crowley and Ian Fleming were spying on the Italians, trying to gain intelligence. And so what Ian Fleming did, the famous story they always tell, is that he knew the Italians were paranoid about a certain type of British attack. So he found a corpse, basically dressed it up like a sailor or a submariner, I guess it would be, and put fake documents on him and fake battle plans so that when the Italians found this corpse, they would be like, oh, I knew it, they're going to attack such and such an attack. Meanwhile, of course, then when they found that, they would be like, oh, we found the secret information. They don't know that we know, right? So they'll position all their troops and move their hardware around to try and respond to this sneak attack. Meanwhile, that was all a diversion that was deliberately created so that when the British are doing what they're really trying to do, all the Italian enemy forces will be somewhere else. And so, you know, this is why Crowley lived up next to Skull Mountain, right, on the Abbey of Thelema. He was on the giant skull at Cefalu in Sicily, trying to spy on Italian naval positioning movements, and of course doing all his other nonsense. But at any rate, this gives you an example of how Weltanschauungskrieg and worldview war and memetic warfare works. The first step is understand the psychology of your enemy, exploit his prejudices, exploit his fears, exploit his lust and desire, exploit whatever deep motivating factors are there that you can perceive, and exploit and use them to misdirect, redirect, you know, etc. And so, you know, I got into this a little bit in last time's video where I was like, whatever you're hearing on the news is not the story. That's all the distraction. It has nothing to do with what's really happening, right? This is really a trade war and so on, like that. And they guarantee they always want to provide all these different 100 different narratives, you know, the Arabic, whatever, Al Jazeera, whatever. If you think CNN and Al Jazeera and whatever, all AP and Reuters that are all controlled by the Rothschilds and whatever, if you think that's objective news and not 100% propaganda, and just because, you know, Haaretz or whatever, or the, you know, Jerusalem Post is propaganda, doesn't mean that the Al Jazeera isn't propaganda. They're all propaganda. You know, you can have 10 different types all at once. And the more types there are, and the more you can confuse the issue and misdirect and create a bunch of fake stories about shit, that's all dramatic and that gets people involved and exploits their fear. Like for me, I got to admit, it worked on me hardcore when they were like, oh, Netanyahu's dead. I was like, yes. I was like, you know, trying to root for that and like hoping that was true. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you think in such a way, your perceptions are no longer objective. Right? You're not looking at reality as is. You're looking at your own desires and expectations and assumptions about bullshit that it may or may not be true, right? So that's more important than the facts. That's how world events are driven by bullshit. They're not driven by facts. They're driven by emotional reactions. not by facts. They're driven by myths about bullshit that never happened 3,000 years ago and some racial bullshit. Like, for instance, just as a basic example, okay, we have all these stories in the Bible about how, whatever, Daniel in the lion's den, whatever it was in the Babylon, he's descended from all these rabbis and whatnot, and he's in Babylon running the fucking empire. Hello? You think that's not about Iran? You think that's not how Iran is? You don't think Mossad and the fucking Israeli government and all their mafioso and all their child trafficking, boy love ops aren't running in the fucking Iranian high command? Come on, man. They've infiltrated that shit before any of our great grandparents were even born. Okay, this is the reality. And we want to be told this paper tiger story about the puppet show of, oh, the mullahs with their turbans and the little greedy shickle grubers rubbing their hands together with their little yarmulkes. Like, that's all a cartoon. That's not how it really is. Okay, and same goes for America. Same goes for GI Joe America, right? And Team America World Police. That's not what people think, is not reality whatsoever. Okay, this is an economic enterprise, and the perception of chaos, the perception of violence, the perception of resource scarcity, these are big, massive money makers. And the more human emotional energy and human attention you can mobilize, coalesce, and bring together in some type of condensation nuclei of these memetic narratives, like, that's power. Okay, that's what turns the world economy. That's what moves $1 billion in fucking oil future trading, right? At fucking just the same thing that was going on back in the Napoleonic Wars with the Rothschilds. None of that has changed one bit. Still going on. Do I know the outcome? No, I don't. How do I evaluate it as an individual? Like, I already admitted that I have a lot of prejudices, and a lot of times I get tricked and fooled by things. But what is the least likely to trick and fool is money. Think about money, okay? That's what's really going on. They always say follow the money, right? Who benefits? And they always say follow the money, right? Those are very valuable things to look at. And in my instance, my view of this whole this whole big deal, it's not about countries and nation states, okay? It's not really about religions and ideologies. And, because those guys in Iran and whatever, they're not, I mean, they call themselves clerics, but they're not some kind of holy prophets and all this shit. They're money makers, okay? And of course, all those dudes are run by probably the Rothschild Bank in London, okay? That's who pays them. And they want chaos, okay? They want to create chaos. They want to create Hamas, and they want to create. You don't think Israel funds Hamas and makes sure that they have access to weapons, and I can't even keep all these fucking groups straight. Hamas, and there's so many of them, there's so many different groups that they have, and they're all fronts. ISIS-K, they had ISIS-K for a while. I'm trying to remember the other group. Hezbollah, that's the other one. You don't think these are run and funded by all sides? They are. And okay, this is what I think. And I can't, these are not things that I could prove, but this is what I think, is that I think that they want certain shit destroyed. They want to build a bunch of smart cities. They want to have new oil pipelines and new energy. And that's the other thing. They're switching into fusion. And other types of energy technology. They're bringing them online. And they want to have a completely different resource distribution, power distribution, and a completely different energy economy for the whole world. Okay, that's what they want. Now, in order to get that, there's a bunch of greedy, super rich people with a lot of power and a lot of weapons, and they all want to control the new order, right? They all are fighting over who gets to control what, and jockeying and positioning to see who gets to be in control. But the thing is, it's all getting burnt. It's all getting bulldozed. It's all getting razed to the ground, and having a new ordo ab chaos come out of it, right? Order out of chaos. So you have to have the chaos first. And in my opinion, they're blowing up a bunch of old missiles. They're sinking and damaging and burning a bunch of old shitty boats that it's already out of date anyway. I think they probably all sat down together and were like, it's all going to be about drones and robots pretty soon. How are we going to get rid of all this metal and all this fucking boats and all these shitty plastic drones? They're like, fuck it, let's have a big party, we'll blow shit up. And some people say the Russians are giving them targeting data, the Chinese are giving the Iranians targeting data, the US is giving different factions targeting data. I think they all want shit to get blown up, even in their own land, so it can be it's just like Nero burnt down Rome to expand his palace, or how they burnt down the quote unquote Great Fire of London in 1666, and all these different fires that happened in the North America too. Same. It's controlled chaos, plain and simple. Okay. Same thing with a lot of these floods and mudslides and fires. They have the tech to control that on an incredibly refined level. People don't want to think. I don't like to think about it, but it's a fucking fact. I've seen it proven to me in a million ways. Whatever happens was meant to happen on that scale, and where there's that amount of money, where there's billions of dollars involved. That's not happenstance. Okay, the Palisades and Lahaina. Oh yeah, it just happened to go where there's all this super high-end real estate that Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah want to buy, or Paradise Fire where they had all the gold mines and shit like that. Like, hello, they want to rezone all that shit. They know no one's going to go along with it. And same, okay, so that same, people admit that about the fires and stuff, that a lot of people are onto this concept. But what about the wars? You don't think the wars obey the exact same thing? You don't think both sides are having the good old Mithraic handshake with Mithras, or whatever his name is, Mithridates and Anaximander and all these dudes, like shaking hands at the borderline during the conflict and stuff like that? It's all a big racket, and it's all a big game. And it's so tempting to get all emotional about it, and the four horsemen are coming, it's the apocalypse, it's Armageddon, blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Think about how much stuff they can get away with if people have these irrational, racially based, religious based things about some flying horse Barak in the sky that's carrying Muhammad around, or some fucking cloud that's carrying Jesus around, or the fucking one-eyed Dajjal coming out of a fucking mushroom cloud, whatever it is. All this nonsense that people believe. This is how little kids think about Spider-Man and shit like that. Okay, this is not a serious world where there's literally billions of people in this world that believe in Jewish fairy tales and think that they're somehow different from that. I can't even believe, like, we're still pretending like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism aren't the same thing. Like, and they have the same common goal. They have the same playbook that they're all following to have Armageddon. They just have different ideas about who gets to win. But really, nobody wins. It's a big death cult. Okay, come on. Child sacrifice is the basis of the whole thing. And when are people going to kind of get hip to that? Drinking the communion blood and eating the beef jerky, the holy beef jerky wafers and so on. Like Epstein would call it beef jerky, whatever. What do you think? They're telling you right what it is themselves. This is Cain ableism. This is we're eating the body and blood of our Savior. It's like, are we still, this is 2026, and we're still pretending that that's cool and real? And people, on the basis of stuff like that, people are like, oh yeah, I want to spend all eternity with the guy who makes sure that we always have to do this cannibal blood drinking ritual every Sunday. He's the good guy. I want to spend all eternity with him. If only I can obey so good that he lets me into the pearly gates of Cain ableism, to live forever with our child sacrifice cult. Like, what the fuck is wrong with people? But that's where we are, and that's how memetic warfare is used to control the destiny of this entire planet. Millions have to die. A lot of shit gets blown up. A lot of people go without power and fresh and clean water, so that, the chosen ones can rape and pillage and steal everyone's land. And this is the same thing that happened with Cristobal Colon. You don't think he was over here for the Vatican Jesuits, the Moranos and the Conversos, like raking up some shekels out of the mountains and giving syphilis? Like, how has anything changed? And the thing is, we got internet now. Okay, we got AI to tell us. And if you go, I'm impressed. Okay, I gotta admit, I'm really impressed with Grok and these different bots. Like, they could tell you a lot of facts, but I think they cater to me because they know I'm educated, and they know by the questions that I ask that I'm not gonna believe their bullshit. So they give me something that's appropriate to me. It's custom tailored to me, to their way. They put in the Weltanschauungskrieg on me. They're like, oh yeah, reality makes sense. Don't worry. Like, here's a history of all the stuff that you already believe in. And that's what it does to all of us, right? And so we're in a reality war against reality weapons, okay? And this is why I think Buddhism is valuable, because it starts from the basic assumption that everything you're perceiving is an illusion, okay? It's temporary. It's a temporary fluctuation, and it exists in a state of interdependence. Nowhere in it are you going to find absolutes that you can cling to and hold on to, and they're going to protect you from death, aging, old age, and sickness and stuff like that. It doesn't work that way at all. Okay? What works is to recognize that there's something within us, something about us that's non-material. We have a spirit, we have a soul, we have a memory, and a continuous essence of the what's called the tantra, which is like this web and this framework that passes on between bodies and between lifetimes and between time and space. Like it can be transferred. It's informational and it's energetic. Okay, so it's not mortal like the physical body. It doesn't have those same type of limitations. And that's why as a Buddhist, what we do is we train and practice not only with this life in mind and the pleasures of this life, we think about continuous tantra thread of lifetimes that we can live through. And we think about how to transmit our essence and to transmit positive karma, positive cause and effect from one action to the next, and to create and build and to weave the fabric of the future that we want to create. How is this done? This is done through internal memetic warfare, through internal memetics, because we have internal concepts of self-improvement. We have internal concepts that teach us and show us the method to dismantle all falsehood and all illusions and all weaponized enemy memetics propaganda. We dismantle it all. We don't allow ourselves to get into praise and blame, pleasure and pain, self and other. We break down all those false dichotomies, and we recognize that everything's in a state of flux, just like the pre-Socratics taught us, just like Heraclitus and Zeno and so on. We learn the lessons, and we're immune to memetic warfare at some point. And I think this is a highly advisable course of action to follow, and it's going to prevent a lot of stress and strife and fear and clinging to things that don't really exist or things that are highly temporary, right? So this is what I'm trying to get across in the Spirit War series. I hope this has been fun. Spirit War 101. We'll be back again soon.